Hi everyone, Petrik here. For today's video, this will be my January wrap-up. In the month of January, I managed to finish 6 or technically 7 books, and I'm not gonna lie, this is an awesome reading month. Every book that I managed to finish in the month of January, I loved them all. I gave 5 books that I finished a 4 out of 5 stars rating. I gave 1 book a 4.5 out of 5 stars rating, and I gave 1 book 5 out of 5 stars rating. I think if you have seen my reviews that I posted in the past month, you will know immediately which book received a 5 out of 5 stars rating from me and also which one received a 4 out of 5 stars rating. And let's get started immediately. The first book that I finished in the month of January, it was Spinning Silver by Naomi Novik. So yeah, back in the year 2017, the first book that I decided to read was Uprooted by Naomi Novik. So back then, I heard so many good things about Uprooted, and if you're new to this channel, let me just tell you that Uprooted is one of my most hated book of all time. Yeah, I really dislike Uprooted, okay? And because of my negative feelings towards Uprooted, well, I thought that I would never give Naomi Novik a try again. Even though I was actually interested in plenty of her other books like this one, Spinning Silver, and also Temporary series, and also recently a coming-of-age fantasy series, I think it's called Scholomance. Yeah, it started with A Deadly Education. I was quite interested in all of that, but I keep on remembering how much I dislike Uprooted, and my motivation to read them just vanished. That eventually changed last year after I saw a review by Elliot Brooks. Yeah, Elliot Brooks did an incredible review on Spinning Silver, and because of that review, she mentioned that it's not only her actually, but she also mentioned that even though she disliked Uprooted, she absolutely loves Spinning Silver, and a lot of other people have mentioned the same thing. And 5 years later, this month, in January, Spinning Silver is the first book that I read in the month of January, the first book that I chose to begin this year, and it was incredible. This is one of my favorite standalone novel of all time now, and I can't believe that this is written by the same author. I really have to say thank you so much to Elliot Brooks and also to my friend Mary, who actually gifted me this hardcover copy of Spinning Silver. This cover art again is done by Nico Delort. I really love the design and the artwork on this. Take a look at this. After you read this book, there is actually so much details contained within this cover art, and the cover art just became more beautiful now to me. And this is a magnificent book. One of my favorite things about Spinning Silver is that all of the POV characters in this book, Naomi Novik was brave enough to use a first-person narration for all of them. And to make things even more awesome, she doesn't use any character name to actually begin their chapters. So let's say that in a chapter, the story is told from Miriam's perspective. And in the next chapter, it will move to other characters, for example, a Wanda. But unlike A Song of Ice and Fire or Red Rising Saga also used a multiple first-person narration for the 4th and 5th book. In Red Rising Saga, the beginning of each chapter will tell you whose perspective we're reading, but that's not the case in Spinning Silver. There is no character name to begin the chapter, and so it's all up to the characters' distinctive voices. And Naomi Novik was able to make every character, even though all of them are told from first-person narration, all of them are so distinctive. And I think that's something praiseworthy, to do a multiple first-person narration, more than 2 POV characters, and all of them have distinctive voices. That is not an easy thing to do. And I truly felt that Naomi Novik was able to do that wonderfully, and I really loved the characters in this book. The characterizations for almost all the main characters were incredibly well done, and also Naomi Novik's prose was so beautiful. Petrik Rothfuss has mentioned that he won't be able to write as beautifully as Naomi Novik, although I do think that Rothfuss' prose is better. That's just my preference. But yeah, I do have to agree that Naomi Novik's prose in this book is so stunning. And although I never experienced winter, I think this book will be a very fitting recommendation for winter read. It's so cold, and the landscape, everything just feels like it's covered with snow and ice, and it's beautiful. So yeah, if you're looking for a great standalone novel, try this one. This is a one-off standalone, and it is amazing. Then the next book that I finished in the month of January, this is something that I absolutely love, and it is Illborn by Daniel T. Jackson. So yeah, this is the one that I gave 5 out of 5 stars rating. I have done a full spoiler-free review for this book on this channel and on my Goodreads and also on my blog. And I just have to say again that this is an absolutely compelling, character-driven epic fantasy novel. And if you love character-driven fantasy book, you have to give this book a try. And if you can take my recommendation, just try reading the prologue. See if it sparks your interest in this book or not, because it did spark my interest. This is still a criminally underrated book in my opinion. I first heard about how great this was. It was from Bookstagram and also from Twitter. I saw some readers who have read this book saying how much they loved it, and because the author sent this to me to review, and you know what? I tried reading the prologue, and the prologue, even though it was so amazing, the rest of the book is even better, and trust me, it gets so intense, and I really felt for all the main characters. This is such an addictive read. I remember that I was so busy during the time I was reading this book, but every moment I could find the time to read, I tried to still read this one, a chapter or two, because I just have to find out what's next. Daniel Jackson frequently ended each character's chapter with a tension-packed cliffhanger, and it always made me feel like, I want to find out what's next, but then again, I have to read the other characters first. But then again, after that next character chapter ended, I feel the same way again, and it keeps on repeating itself until the end of the book. This is character-driven fantasy at its best, and lately it's not easy for me to find an epic fantasy novel, especially a debut, that made me really excited to read every POV characters. The prose is very accessible, and this will remain as one of my top 10 books of the year within this year, for sure. I also have an interview with Daniel Jackson coming up really soon. I hope you will watch that one. It will be entirely spoiler-free. Then the next book that I finished in the month of January is Rise of the Ranger by Philip C. Quaintrell. This is the first book in the 9-book series called the Echo Saga, and I really enjoyed this one as well. This is a classic fantasy that's told with a modern voice, and I have done a full review on this channel as well. And although the first 35% or 40% of this book can be a bit rough here and there, because Philip C. Quaintrell needed to do this introduction to introduce all the necessary main characters and also world building before he can proceed with all the actions and also the conflicts. And I think that's a smart choice, especially for a 9-book series like this. There are more than 8 main POV characters to follow in Rise of the Ranger, and yeah, that can take some time to get used to, but I think it's so worth it. I have no doubt that the rest of the series will be better than Rise of the Ranger. The actions was really vivid and easy to read, and the last quarter of Rise of the Ranger was so hard to put down. And for those of you who haven't heard of this book before, let me just tell you that in this book, it has one of the coolest group of assassins that I've ever seen in fantasy. They're practically what I called a daredevil with swords. So cool. It is so cool. I just started reading the second book, Empire of Dirt, and it's looking very promising to be better than Rise of the Ranger already. And then the next book that I finished is The Bear and the Nightingale by Katherine Arden. This is the first book in the Winter Night trilogy, and for this one, I just have to say that I really love the main character in The Bear and the Nightingale. Vasha is an awesome heroine. Vasha and her endearing relationship with her siblings are definitely the main driving force of the book for me. The Winter Night trilogy is one of my priority series to start and finish within this year, and that's also why I finally began it. And also, for those of you who don't remember, I did mention that I wanted to read this during winter season, even though there is no winter in my country, but still, I got what I want. This is a very atmospheric, and reading this book with a combination of air conditioner actually made me feel really cold. And I think that's great. I'm not usually a fan of historical fantasy, but this one really worked for me. It is an atmospheric read, and also it's very engaging. And I love folktales, but I know close to nothing about Russian folktales. I usually learn about Japanese folktales, and reading The Bear and the Nightingale made me do a lot of research on each spirit that's mentioned in this book, and I loved it. I love learning about these kind of things. Probably the only thing that didn't work for me in The Bear and the Nightingale is that I mentioned this in my review that I posted on Goodreads, and a lot of people have mentioned that I was right. So here's the thing. The Bear and the Nightingale, each character in the book has a lot of nicknames. Yeah, they have a lot of nicknames, and some of them actually sounded so different from one another to me. Okay, apparently this is something that's common in Russian literature, and I have learned about this since I posted my review on The Bear and the Nightingale. I think that's something that's interesting and enlightening. I love learning about something like this. So thank you so much to all of you who have told me about this. But yeah, this during my first read of The Bear and the Nightingale definitely takes some time to get used to, because it was kind of difficult for me to tell who's who. And also I think the ending sequence, though well written, could have been longer. But then again, this is a great debut and also a great first book of a trilogy. I look forward to reading The Girl in the Tower this month. And the next two books that I finished in the month of January is Theft of Swords Omnibus, which consists of The Crown Conspiracy and also Avem Parta. This is the first two books in the Rhyria Revelations, and just like my experience with Naomi Novik, this is kinda like me giving a second chance to the Rhyria Revelations, which by the end of it, I absolutely love, okay? By the end of the Heir of Navran. But on my first read of Theft of Swords, I was so underwhelmed. On the second read, my experience of reading Theft of Swords for both books, The Crown Conspiracy and also Avem Parta, both of them increased significantly. It almost felt like I was reading a new book that I haven't read, because I feel so connected with all the characters already. It was a joy to be reading about Royce and Hadrian again, and of course the supporting characters that I love, Arista, Myron, Esarhaddon, and also Thrace. I love these characters, and now I felt like I could connect with all the characters much better. There are two issues that I had with reading Theft of Swords the first time. The first one being that a lot of people back then told me that this is one of the most epic fantasy series of all time. So I came into this book expecting that it will be something super epic, but it's not. Even to this day, I still don't call Rhyria Revelation an epic fantasy. It is a high fantasy, and I know that high fantasy and epic fantasy are basically the same, but personally speaking, I like to think that epic fantasy means that it has an epic scope, an epic battle being waged, and also multiple factions having conflict around the world. While high fantasy definitely means that this is a fantasy series that takes place in a different world than our own. So yeah, that was one of my main issue with Theft of Swords the first time I read through it. And the second one, and this is the biggest of them all, is that so many people told me that Royce and Hadrian are the best duo in epic fantasy. Now, I am guilty of this myself right now, but what people didn't told me back then is that they only felt that way after they finished the last book in Rhyria Revelations, The Heir of Navran. And I think this is an important distinction to make, because Royce and Hadrian in the first two books aren't well-developed characters in the first two books of Rhyria Revelations. That's why I think if I recommend this series to someone now, I think I will actually recommend them to start from Rhyria Chronicles, because Rhyria Chronicles did a lot of incredible characterizations for both Royce and Hadrian, especially Royce. During my first read of Rhyria Revelations, I didn't care about Royce until I finished the fifth book, which is the first book in The Heir of Navran. So it took me that long for me to feel finally fully invested in both Royce and Hadrian. Michael Sullivan didn't spend much time on characterizing both Royce and Hadrian in Theft of Swords. I think Theft of Swords is more focused on the supporting characters, and I felt like in the first two books of Rhyria Revelations, we rarely get to read Royce and Hadrian's thoughts. But then again, let me just say that Theft of Swords on the second read is just incredible. On my first read of The Crown Conspiracy, I gave it a 2 out of 5 stars. Yeah, I was so disappointed by Crown Conspiracy, but on my second read, I gave this a 4 out of 5 stars. And the same thing kind of applies to second book, Avem Parta. In my first read of Avem Parta, I gave it 3.5 out of 5 stars, and in my second read, I gave it 4 out of 5 stars. So yeah, this is a series that keeps on getting better with each book, and also I think this is a series that will keep on getting better with each reread. I am so looking forward to reading Rise of Empire this month. And lastly, the final book that I finished in the month of January, this is The Fires of Heaven by Robert Jordan. So yeah, this is the fifth book in the Wheel of Time series. I just did a review on this channel about why I finally decided to continue reading The Wheel of Time. But to sum it briefly, let me just say that it's been almost 3 years since I first read The Shadow Rising, which completely disappointed me. But I finally gave The Fires of Heaven a try, and I'm not disappointed by this one. I actually really enjoyed The Fires of Heaven despite its issues. Ren and also Matt definitely stole the show in The Fires of Heaven for me. I loved reading their POV so much, especially Matt. And even though the female characters in this book and series, especially Nynaeve, still drive me insane here, I feel like I was able to tolerate their antics and behaviors more this time, because I kinda treat them as a running joke throughout the series now. But I can't say the same for the circus and also the romance in this book and the series, because wow, as I said in my review for The Fires of Heaven, I think Robert Jordan wrote some of the worst romance that I've read in fantasy. But I have to say that the world building is amazing as always. And also the final quarter of the Fires of Heaven was so exciting. I am actually looking forward to reading Lord of Chaos, but I don't think that will happen within this month or next month. I have a feeling that I will be reading Lord of Chaos in either May or June. It depends on my reading mood, but with the Wheel of Time series, I think it's better for me to take a few months break between books. But yeah, I am excited to continue my journey in the Wheel of Time. So yeah, that's all the books that I finished in the month of January, and my book of the month will definitely have to go to Illborn by Danielle T. Jackson. This is such an amazing debut, and I look forward to reading the sequel as soon as possible. Do let me know which books I just mentioned caught your interest, and let me know how many books you finished in the month of January and which one is your favorite book of the month. As always, thank you so much for watching, and thank you for your support. Bye bye.